Tonight's presentation, Backpacks and Briefcases, will be given by Cynthia Hall-Ferro, class of 1982, and double alumni Caroline Portlock of 02 and 04. Now I will turn the floor to them.
What we thought we'd do is just start out and tell you just a tiny bit about ourselves, but tonight isn't really about us, it's about you. And so, like Kayla had said, I was graduated from, it was College of St. Francis at the time, in 1982, which was a long time ago. I've also been in the Air Force, worked as a weather forecaster, and I've been in HR for 20 years. And so that's really the relevant experience to what we're going to be talking about tonight. And then I'll let Carolyn tell you a little bit about herself.
And, I graduated in 02 and then in 04 with my MBA. I sit on the alumni board. So once you become an alum, you'll start hearing from all of us and we'll start bugging you about becoming more involved with USF in that respect. I've been in marketing and in human resources. I currently run a Chamber of Commerce in Grundy County. And
you know, what we wanted to do here is talk a little bit about what is truly important and from the standpoint of what do you want to do. So, you know, these are the 4 things that we felt were most important, and that's to create content that sells, because literally you are selling yourself to that company. You've got to give them a compelling reason to pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, I want to talk to you further. So you've got to get something that's going to grab their attention very quickly, and that's the next one. You know, how are you going to get them to really think about why you should be the one that they call? Powerful words. You know, you don't want to just use very dull, and I can't really think of any off the top of my head, dull ones, but you know, you just don't want to be mundane. Why do you want to stand out? Well, you can stand out by using powerful words. And then you want to create an image. I mean, those are the really 4 important things. So what we wanted to show you is some very unique resumes. Now, we're not necessarily advocating that you do this, particularly depending on your major, but this was one that my son had sent me, and he thought it was pretty cool. It was in the form of a candy bar. And, you know, what the type of job was, you know, marketing professional, which you can pretty much figure that would be important for them to be able to show that they're kind of unique in nature. But if you're going to try to be an accountant, I don't know that this would be particularly useful. Or an HR person.
Right.
This one didn't come out really well, but what it's done, it's actually on fabric. And, you know, what it looks like to me is that the person wanted to be in some sort of design. You know, maybe interior design or, you know, pardon? Graphic design, yeah. Something like that. So then, and then this is a little different. And again, Carolyn and I were talking before we got started here. We were like, our heads would spin trying to read this.
That would annoy me.
But in some worlds, this might be the appropriate thing to do. So, you know, again, we just wanted to show you some very unique ones. Again, not that we're necessarily advocating these, but we wanted to show you what, you know.
What we really wanted you to know is the content and what's important to put in there. And we'll tell you a little bit about the important things to leave off. But we think certainly highlighting your education is extremely important. Make sure that you give us information about your experience. Right now, with the unemployment rate, employers are not only looking for education, but they're also looking for experience. And I know that if you haven't had a paying job yet, that's sometimes difficult to articulate, but take the volunteer experience that you have and turn it into a paragraph in your resume. Build it just like you would if you had a job there. You just didn't get paid for it, but note the dates that you worked there, what you accomplished while you were there. So make sure you add your volunteer stuff. If you have any certifications in certain programs, or if you took seminar work, make sure you include that. If you had a leadership role in any of your experiences, make sure that you put that down, and your accomplishments. It's sometimes where you get into the buzzwords as well. You know, we don't want to know that you were developing something. We want to know that you successfully developed this, or that you, not that you were coordinating, but that, you know, you successfully did this and this was the result of it. Too often we see resumes that look like they're in the process of, and not necessarily how the project concluded and what the outcomes were, and that's where you can really shine. Again, when you're building your resume, keep in mind who's going to read it. So make sure that the content is relevant to the job that you're going for. Don't spend an awful lot of time and energy talking about a particular project or experience if it really has nothing to do with the job that you're going for.
Okay, so what's not important? A lot of times, and I don't know how much people talk about the objective anymore, but a lot of times I hear that people are just agonizing over what do I put as an objective. Excuse me. Our opinion is leave it out.
Yeah.
There's really no reason for it. You're going to state what you're looking for and some other things in your cover letter, so why put it in your resume and take up room?
Right.
So we just say leave it out. Don't put in irrelevant personal information. I mean, things that have no bearing on how you are a better person for that job should not be included in that resume. And the other thing that I think is important to note here, and my son and I actually had this conversation, is if you belong to an organization that you don't know how it's going to be perceived by the potential employer, you have to make a decision as to whether or not to include it. You know, sometimes those organizations may have a race affiliation, they may have a religious affiliation, you know, they may have other types of affiliations that could be viewed very, very positively in some situations. They could be viewed very, very negatively in others. And the reason we had that conversation was my son is a Mason and a Shriner in the Scottish Rites. And in some circles, those are viewed very negatively. A lot of people have some very odd ideas about what those organizations are all about. And in other circles, I mean, that'll get you a job. I mean, it'll pretty much get you in the door. But what you have to decide when you're putting your resume together is, okay, do I put it on there? Do I risk it? Do I just maybe talk about it when I'm in the interview and I see in the guy's office he's got a Mason, you know, plaque up or something, and then I say I'm a Mason too. And so you just want to think about that. And then I see a lot of times on resumes, you know, references available upon request. Well, it's a given, so don't put it on there. Just leave it off. Again, you've got a short, you know, amount of space, usually a page or two, that you are trying to get their attention. Don't clutter it up with things that don't matter.
Right. Yes. Make sure that you use a professional email address. I don't want to respond to somebody, you know, hotmess at hotmail.com. I mean, we've all got St. Francis email addresses. Use those, or use one that doesn't have a nickname in it, is difficult to remember, or may tell a little bit more about you than you really want.
Your name's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mine's Hall-Ferro at yahoo.com, you know. It's real straightforward. So what's important in terms of the style, the resume building, in terms of the style of the resume? We talked about the content. And I guess before we actually go into style, any questions on the content? Any thoughts, anything that you've ever been told that we're telling you something different? Okay, so style, what's important? The reason this one is kind of in orange is because we wanted to make sure that you understood that these are the top 3 important things, but there's a bunch more things that we're going to go over besides these. Customize. I mean, we can't say that enough tonight. Make sure that you have, you know, Carolyn said a little bit ago, have a couple different resumes built, you know, so that if you're applying for a couple different types of jobs, you can kind of say, okay, this one's going to be if I go for this type of job, and this one if I go for this type, and this one if I default to this third option over here. So customize them and make sure that you're talking about things that are relevant to what you're applying for. You know, if your primary focus is going to be teaching, you know, again, we've talked about it being relevant to that, but what if you decide to apply for something a little bit different? You know, let's say that you can't find a teaching job right away, but you decide to apply for a job at Sylvan, doing some tutoring or something. You want to make sure that you customize it so that it makes sense for that environment. And I'm just kind of making that up, but it just seemed like a good example. And then we talked about this one already. You know, talk about your accomplishments versus just a laundry list of the things, the boring things that you did in a job. And then prioritize your content. What's most important? Well, typically when you're just graduating, your education is going to be most important, because that's really what you're banking on to get you in the door. And then from there, your jobs would be secondary. And then the clubs from there would be maybe, you know, at a third level and down. So any thoughts on that?
The other things that are important is the format. you know, keep in mind, just because you have the rainbow of colors to use and all sorts of fonts, you don't need to use all of them in one document. So you really want to highlight what's important. You know, we'll give you an example of the chronological versus the functional later on, but you know, both have their place. We both have a preference on what we like to see, but we're not the one reviewing your resume. So again, you need to get to know the organization that you're applying for and know what they're expecting, because there are companies out there who absolutely want to see skill-based, functional resumes over chronological. We just don't happen to think that those are the best, but that's us. Spelling, grammar, and punctuation. I know that a lot of them are done in bullet points, but all of that still matters. And don't rely on spell check, because if you've spelled the company's name wrong, spell check won't know that. So make sure that you've gone over it. Make sure you give it to someone else to read. It's amazing how a set of eyes that has absolutely no idea what you're doing and they can just pick out every typo, or they can pick out when you run 4 sentences on. Make sure that you get someone that you trust that can read that for you and be that fresh set of eyes. Make it bullet points. Don't give me full sentences on everything. I can pretty much figure out the gist of it if you just give me some really clear and concise bullet points on what you've done.
We average about 30 seconds on a resume if we're actually reviewing them, manually. Okay, so if we get in a bunch of resumes, we bother to print them out and everything, and we're just looking through them, 30 seconds to grab our attention. And I will tell you quite honestly, unless I'm looking at a PhD person, I am not going to read a paragraph, and that's why the bullets are so important. It automatically goes in the no pile. And I know that sounds really maybe mean to some people as they sit here, but you got to figure HR departments are pretty understaffed because they're non-revenue generating, parts of a company. So they have to figure out how do they get in good candidates but do it quickly. And so what they've done is they've just come up with different ways to make these processes go quicker. And again, if they're doing it manually, they're just going to look for different things that they're going to go, no, 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 no. If they see spelling errors, grammar errors, punctuation issues, no. Too difficult to read, no. It doesn't make sense. That's the other thing. Have somebody that doesn't know anything about you or anything about your major read that resume and make sure that you're not using too much jargon or acronyms or things like that, to make sure that when somebody picks up that resume that doesn't know you, they can understand what you're all about. Because again, what are you doing? You're selling yourself. You're selling yourself to the company. So this is an example of a functional resume, and it's probably a little difficult to pick up on, but you look at the top of it, it has a profile, then it goes into education, and it's just pretty much, they're not really bullet points, but they are kind of bullet points. It just lists a bunch of computer skills, technical skills, and then it talks about the company, and it's just the name of the company, the position, and the dates. And this is where we were talking a little bit about, do you do a functional resume or do you do a chronological resume? And so when you guys look at this and you think about the types of jobs that you'll be applying for, what do you think would be better?
Chronological.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. We don't like these at all. Neither one of us like them, because what is difficult to pick out of here is the person is saying, I have these computer skills, I have these technical skills, but we have no idea for how long they've had them. They could have had them a week, a month, a year, 10 years, but you can't really pick it out. So most HR people are going to just put this one off to the side and just say, too hard to figure out, so I'm just not going to spend time on it.
Other things that are important is font size and margins. Honestly, don't try to get it to one page by pulling the margin all the way to like 0.3. Also, don't use a font size where those of us who are hitting 50 will have to use reading glasses. It annoys us because we won't use reading glasses. So if I can't see it, it goes in this pile. So make sure you use a standard font, a readable font, and then a font size that will work. Make sure you include phone numbers. If you've got a cell phone and that's how you want folks to contact you, great. If you've got it all going to voicemail, okay. But if you've given a phone number that you never check, it's not going to do you any good. Email addresses I talked about, keep them professional. Be sure to include your GPA and follow directions. If they say send your resume to, or upload your resume at, or fax your resume to, do that. The worst thing that you can do is not follow the instructions given to you on how to apply for the job, because I can guarantee you it will keep you from getting any closer to getting an interview for that job.
You know, a couple other things about the phone numbers. The other thing, be really, really careful of. I'll never forget. I mean, this has been probably 5 years now plus. I called a girl for an HR job, and she answered the phone at a bar on a Friday night. Okay, so maybe I was a little dumb as an HR person to be calling someone, you know, at 6 o'clock or whatever it was on a Friday night to talk to them about arranging a phone screen. But at the same time, she picked it up at a bar, and I could just hear her saying, "Hello, I can't hear you. What? Huh? Oh, I'm at a bar." I'm like, hey, thanks for sharing. So if you don't know who it is, if you're in the job search, it's better to let it go to voicemail. Compose yourself, go into a quiet area, and call back. It's really important. And then with the GPA is kind of a funny thing. Because if it's bad, you probably don't want to put it on there. If it's good, you know, you want to flaunt it. I would say you could probably get away with it for 3 to 5 years after you graduate. After that, just get rid of it. But know it. Know what your GPA is, your overall, and your major. Because we actually ask it. And in an interview, that is one of the first things that I ask, if not one of our managers asks. You want to know what your GPA is, because you know, if somebody's got a 2.3, we're probably, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you guys, okay, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but we might shy away from that candidate if we have other candidates that are 3, you know, and above. So, but know it, because it's never good to try to fudge it. Because when people tell me they don't know their GPA, I kind of laugh inside. It's like, yeah, sure you don't. You just don't want to tell me. And if you tell me the wrong thing, well, a lot of companies with recent grads, they will ask for your transcripts. Okay, so they're not just going to do a verification that you graduated. We will ask for transcripts. And we had a girl that we said, hey, thanks anyway, because she lied to us. You know, we got her transcripts, and she had a bunch of D's and F's and pretty low GPA, and she had verbally told me she had above a 3. And it's like, it's better to just fess up and say, hey, I've got a 2.3 or a 2.5 than to lie about it and then get caught later.
That brings us to probably our most important. Honesty is absolutely the best policy. Please don't lie, exaggerate, make things up. Employers check. Employers will check to see if you actually graduated. Employers will check to see if you actually worked there. You know, it's not going to be good for you if you, it'll be a short-term fix.
Yep.
Very short-term.
If you led a project, you led it. If you were a team member, you were a team member. You know, even minor, you know, switches of words like that can get you in trouble, because when you go in for the interview, your interviewer is going to probably ask you, hey, you said you led this project. Tell me about it. What did you do to lead it? You know, what were the obstacles that you ran into? You know, what was your role as a leader? What exactly did you do? And so you're going to get quizzed on it. And then they check. I mean, background checks are a big thing. They check references. They check education, all of that. I mean, we've had, I mean, I could tell you thousands of stories, but, you know, we have turned away PhDers that have lied for whatever reason. You know, they've maybe tried to disguise a gap in employment by misrepresenting it on their resume, and they've gotten caught. We had a guy that was applying for a manager role, and he supposedly had a chemistry degree. Well, we checked. We were almost in the offer stage, and we checked, and guess what? He didn't have a degree. And then he was like, well, yeah, I do. Well, why doesn't the school say you did? Well, when push came to shove, he claimed that he walked, and then he had to leave the country for some reason for a trip, and then he never thought about the fact that he didn't get his diploma, and that he actually was a class or 2 shy. So I know, it made no sense to me, I see your faces. But make sure you have your diploma and you don't lie about it.
And if
So-
you don't have your diploma, just don't lie about it.
Yeah, I'm a
if you
class
have a
away.
gap in, a lot of times people just don't want to be honest because they don't want to fess up to it. The reality is, the guy who had the gap in employment, there's no shame in saying that you have a gap in employment. It's worse if you try to cover it up and then they find out and they say, why does he have a gap in employment? So you're better off to just say it up front or not say it at all if it's not true.
Yeah, exactly. So how are resumes reviewed? We've talked about it a little bit. Different companies have different systems, and it kind of depends on the size of company and how much money they have to spend on their system. But a lot of companies have automated applicant tracking systems. So what that is, you see an ad, you go to respond to that ad, they tell you to go to a certain place. Sometimes it looks just like their website, but you're actually going to, and I'm not going to say the proper terminology here because I'm not an IT person, but it just looks like it, and it's actually hosted by an applicant tracking company of some sort. So you go out there, they may have you fill out an application, they may just have you download a resume. Usually it's both anymore. Keep in mind, if you're filling out an online application, that people are going to be reviewing this. So if you're putting your name in there, capitalize your name. Sometimes people just want to cut corners because filling out a application online and then also having to include a resume can be kind of time consuming. It could probably take you half an hour, if not more. And so what I've seen people do is sometimes they try to cut and paste, sometimes their spelling is atrocious, sometimes they don't capitalize anything, sometimes there's no punctuation. And that all, looks negatively upon you, the applicant, if you don't take the time to do that. Sometimes you can get your resume reviewed through networking, and that's always a good way. I mean, you probably know a lot about networking in terms of what you do, so do you want to make some comments on that?
Well, I think, and here's where really the clubs that you belong to, the groups that you belong to, some of the things that you've done on campus can really help you because it's always about someone that you know. So if you have the opportunity to present your resume to someone because they're a friend of someone else or they know a person that you've worked on a project with, follow up with them. Make sure that you follow the same instructions you would if you were presenting the information to anyone else. But this is a really great opportunity for you to capitalize on a relationship that's already there that you're kind of coming in the middle of. So, make sure that you take the time to put your resume together thoughtfully, a cover letter, and especially then a thank you going to the person who made that introduction to you is key because all of them at some point will follow up and talk about you, and you want to make sure that everyone had something good to say about you. May get you an interview, may get you the job, but it will certainly get you one step closer than if you're just submitting it online.
Yeah, there's statistics out there that and I can't quote any of them off the top of my head, but I know that it's a really high percentage of jobs are obtained through networking, or at least getting your foot in the door for an actual interview. So that's real important. And I like what Carolyn said about make sure you send that thank you to the person that got you in the door. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you're never going to get a favor from them again.
Right.
So that's real important. And then the other thing I would recommend is if you are networking, even if you've got somebody that thinks that they're going to get your resume in the door for you, but you still see that job out, say on Monster or something, go ahead and apply yourself. Okay, get it to that company 2 ways, 3 ways, whatever you have to do, but get it to them so that you don't possibly lose out if that person that you thought you were networking with doesn't follow through for you. Because sometimes, again, going back to those silly applicant tracking systems, if the company is too tied to an applicant tracking system, sometimes the resumes that come in just through networking or through the mail or through faxes don't ever get seen. So that can happen. Then you've got HR review and manager review. And really the main thing that we wanted to talk about here is just realize that people are going to be looking at those resumes and they're going to be making judgments. And every single person in this world is different. Carolyn and I pretty much on the same page with most things that we've talked about tonight. But you could get another company, another HR person, and they may look at things totally different. You know, somebody may love functional resumes. Somebody may not look at grammar and punctuation. You just don't know, you know, and some other people have other quirky things that they look for.
Cover letters, somebody asked about that earlier, and I really always recommend putting together a cover letter. It truly is your introduction to that person, to that company. So you want to make sure that you've got a complement to your resume, and that is the cover letter, in my opinion. You don't restate the obvious. Don't take your resume, put it in sentence form, and that's your cover letter. Again, customize it to the company that you are applying for, and that's a really easy thing to do. The other thing is, make sure if you're sending it electronically, in the subject line, make sure you refer back to the position, particularly if it's a larger HR company. They may have a lot of open positions, and if you just send your resume, they may not know exactly which position you're applying for. And the cover letter really is another way for you to set yourself apart from the other candidates, because it can help you put your best foot forward.
How long would you recommend the cover letter?
One
average?
page.
Yeah, if not less than one page.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not more.
No.
How can you like individualize your cover letter? Because don't most of them kind of like look the same? I mean, like, because you're basically just talking about yourself, and I don't know. How do you like individualize that really? Like to make it stand out as opposed to just being like a page of information.
Well, one of the things that I did when I started putting mine together was I would highlight something in a particular paragraph, and that's what that paragraph was about. So if I were applying for my current position, which is all membership based, and I needed to make sure they knew that I was okay with cold calling and everything else, that I put together. My cover letter was 2 paragraphs and the greeting and salutation, and those 2 paragraphs took what I thought were the most important parts of that job, and I gave them the reasons why I was the best candidate based on my experience.
I mean, is there anything like for a resume you can make it like aesthetically pleasing to like kind of like get in the door, but is it just you're kind of like shooting for the stars there with the cover letter? Is it just like kind of just go for it, or?
Well, since so few companies really view the actual paper portion of it, and what you're doing is you're either cutting and pasting into boxes,
Right.
you know, in an applicant system, which there's no way to make that
Pretty.
more pleasing to look at. So what you're having to do is make it compelling through words, really. And then if you're attaching it, it depends on the system that they're using for attaching, if it's even going to look nice once they open it. Because the one company I was at, every time we tried to open them, they looked like gibberish sometimes.
So do you guys read the cover letters like first, or do you read the resume and then decide if you want to read the cover letter, or?
Typically, I read the cover letter first.
Yeah, you know, we do a lot, and I think we kind of passed over it. Somebody before said that you need to have keywords for the automated systems to search. And so a lot of times what we do is we do a keyword search first.
For the cover letter?
Usually the cover letter and the resume is in that applicant tracking system. So within that system, what you do is you put in, 5 to 10 keywords, and then what it does is it finds those within either the body of the resume or the body of the cover letter, and then it pulls up the closest matches. And then what you do is you get, you got maybe 3 people that are 100% match, you maybe got 5 that are 90% match, and so on. And then the person doing the recruiting, whether it be the recruiter, the HR person, the manager, then they will actually pull it up and look at it. And everybody's different. Some managers will tell me they don't even read the cover letter. Other managers love the cover letter. Some HR people read it, some don't. So you've got to do everything in your power to make everything that you present as compelling as possible about you, so that you can appeal to all these different personality types that could be looking at you as a possible candidate. And I wish I could give you something more concrete, because it's so difficult, because you're like, well, what can I do? But there's no hard and fast rule that I can give you.
Probably the best thing that you can do is if you can work with your career services. Kelly is great and she came from the workforce side. Kelly Lapatino is she's the director.
Yes.
So I would say if there's one phone call that you make, one appointment that you make, is that you talk with Career Services, because they can give you examples of cover letters that have worked for folks in the past, particularly people who are currently in school looking for maybe their first opportunity. And they can also read over the letter for you and see if it's compelling or if it just sort of restates everything that you're putting in your resume. So there are a lot of good examples out there that you can use. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You really just have to customize it and make sure that it accurately reflects you. So.
And we've kind of said this in a different way, but when you're dealing with salary expectations, there's a lot of literature out there and there's a lot of people that are going to tell you, don't include it. If they ask your salary expectation, don't state it. If they ask your salary history, leave it out. I can tell you from the companies that I worked in that that's absolutely bad advice, because the companies that I worked in, we use it as a screening tool. And let's say you're wanting to be an entry-level engineer, and that company pays $50,000 and you want $70,000. Well, they're going to use that as a screening tool to figure out if they should even talk to you. And so a lot of companies, what they'll do is if you don't include it, they'll just assume that either you didn't follow directions, which was one of the things we talked about before, or that you just didn't include it because you've been told by somebody erroneously not to do it, but that they don't have the time to call you and say, hey, what are you looking for? We're paying 50. What are you looking for? Oh, you're looking for 70, so you're out of the running. So you do need to put it in there if they ask for it. If they don't ask for it, don't volunteer it.
Right.
But it is really important. And can it knock you out of some jobs, just like the literature says? Absolutely, it can. But the companies are doing that for a reason, because what they don't want to happen, and we've actually had it a few times recently with candidates from headhunters, is we'll say, we will pay up to $75,000 for this job. And they send us somebody and they say, this person is willing to take up to $75,000. But we look at them and they've made 90 in the past. And so we start to get into talks, we waste a lot of time interviewing, only to find out at the end of the process when we want to make an offer, and they really want 90. But they, nobody was real upfront about the whole thing, and then we've just wasted their time and we wasted our time.
Right.
So it's really important.
You need to make sure that you're prepared for the interview. So keep track of the jobs that you've applied for. Make sure that you know that you've applied for that job so it doesn't come as a surprise if they call you for an interview. And then do your homework on the company before you get the call. Make sure you know what their expectations are. If you're going to be doing a phone screening, that's going to be a little bit different than if you're going in, will be a lot different than if you're going into the company, but I would say that you still want to set yourself up for the same success. You certainly don't want to take the phone call in the middle of a bar, or even in a public place where you'll feel uncomfortable answering some of the questions. Make sure that you're in a place where you'll feel comfortable talking with them as if you are speaking to them face to face. Make sure you know a little bit about the company that you are applying for or interviewing at. I can't tell you how many times we would interview someone at the casino and they had absolutely no idea what we did. I thought casino was pretty self-explanatory, but I also expected them to at least go onto our website and learn a little bit more about the hours, what type of customer we had, and I was always amazed at how many people didn't do their homework. Also know what type of environment that you're going to be working in. We had actually this conversation. I have a difference of opinion. I don't know if it's my age but I always like to see someone when they come in for an interview dressed for the interview. And that doesn't mean khakis or jeans. To me, it means business casual, usually business formal is what I'd like to see. Cindy thought, you know what, they'd stick out like a sore thumb where I'm at. So, know where you're interviewing at and know what the expectations are. If you can't find that out on their website, looking at their pictures, check them out one night when people are leaving their place of employment. How are they dressed? So at least you know how they will be perceiving you as you walk in. I would say that pajama bottoms are probably not acceptable anywhere.
Right, and when in doubt, dress up versus down.
Right. But what else could you bring? Well, Make sure that you bring extra resumes that you can give them, and that's one way where when you want to make sure that you stand out a little bit, if you give them a resume that has a little bit of color, not all the colors, but a little bit of color, a couple of fonts, that's how you can stand out and you can make sure that they're seeing it the way that you see it. If you're going for any kind of a marketing job or something where you've had some accomplishments that are relevant to that, bring a portfolio of some of the things that you've done, whether it's from a club standpoint, school standpoint, a project that was used at a company that you interned with. Make sure that you include that. Your list of references. Make sure that the people who are on your list of references know that they're on the list of references, and they may get called because a lot of companies call on them now. It's not just give me the references, it goes in their file, and those folks are never called. People really call those references, and make sure that you've got references that have something good to say about you. Former employers, certain things they can and cannot say, and you can't really control that in some respects, but your references should be people who will speak positively of you. And make sure that you send some sort of a follow-up thank you, acknowledging the fact that they took the time to talk with you. This is also your opportunity to tell them a little bit more about you that maybe you didn't get to address in your interview, or to clarify something that maybe came up during the interview. But a handwritten thank you goes a really long way. I'm surprised at how many folks don't do it anymore, and you usually want to do it within the week that you've interviewed. So especially if it's a job you really, really want to be considered for, have a simple note card, write just a couple of sentences. If you can't think of anything you need to clarify or anything that you want to add, sign it and send it off. I think it means a lot to the person who interviewed you. I want to make sure you know what not to bring to an interview. Don't bring a cup of coffee or a bottled water with you. Don't come in chewing gum. If you have to have a breath mint beforehand, that's one thing, but chomping on a big old wad of blue gum is really distracting during an interview. Don't have your cell phone on during the interview, and don't check it 4 or 5 times during the interview. It's amazing, but people do. Make sure you bring a list of questions to ask, so that shows that you're interested in the company, and it will also help you clarify some of the things that you may not know about the position. And make sure that you're giving off good nonverbal cues. So sit up, lean in a little bit. I know that when I'm talking with someone, if I'm interviewing with them, I'm purposely leaning in, because if I don't, then I have a tendency to slouch back, and that's going to send a whole different message. So make sure that your nonverbal cues match your verbal abilities in the